today that is on the Blaze that is a terrifying vision of the end. Business Insider said, you know, we hear these grim predictions all the time, and normally we just kind of write them off. But this one is significant because who said it? Raoul Pal. He is he writes for the Global Macro Investor. It's a research publication for large and institutional investors. He previously co-managed the GLG Global Macro Fund. He is also one of the head guys for the for Goldman Sachs hedge funds. And he said in this presentation that you'll find up on the Blaze, this is what's coming, and he calls it the end game. And again, I want to stress, we make it through this. But here's one of the experts on what he says is coming. And I want you to listen to the logic behind it. Don't listen to the fear, listen to the logic behind it. The world has no engine of growth, with most G20 countries approaching stall speed at the same time. Now, what is that? G20, that's the 20 biggest countries in the world. Approaching stall speed. We have no engine of growth. Ask yourself this question: what is the engine of growth in the United States? Currently, it is being set up that the engine of growth is the stimulus package, is the United States government. Is that real growth? I contend, and you know the answer, no. Where is any growth coming from? If you want to look at anything that is exciting people, it's Facebook. And you see where that is. What is it, down to $26 a share now? $24 a share? The Western world is about to enter a second recession in an ongoing depression. For the first time since the 1930s, we are entering a recession before industrial production, durable goods orders, employment, and private sector GDP have made back their previous highs. Hear that again. For the first time since the 1930s, we're entering a recession before we've made it back up on our feet. Usually we have a recession, it starts to grow again, and then we come back down. This is a new trend, and this is the trend that we had in the 1930s during the Great Depression. FDR, because of this ridiculous stimulus that he did, and the nouveau d'ordre that he was trying, it kept us in a depression and kept going up a little bit and then down. Fact, this will be the lowest cyclical peak in GDP growth in G7 history. These are the weakest ever foundations on which to enter a recession. The problem is down to one thing: debt. This is significant. The 10 largest debtor nations on earth have total debts of over 300% of world GDP. History tells us that when sovereign defaults occur, what does that mean? Sovereign defaults. Sovereign default. If a sovereign default occurs, that means Greece goes out of business. Spain goes out of business. Portugal goes out of business. The euro is a bubble. It will crash. That's a sovereign union. When that thing crashes, that's what he's talking about. History tells us that when sovereign defaults occur, they come in a series of defaults. We need to understand history in order to grasp the present. The domino effect. In history, when you have a default, one falls into the other and the other and the other. So he says, what is coming? EU sovereign debt defaults. UK sovereign default. Japan sovereign default. South Korea sovereign default. China sovereign default. China is interesting because most people think China is so strong. China is building ghost cities. You can only build ghost cities so long before you're like, you know what, we can't build any more ghost cities. So he says all of these will default, and the biggest banking crisis in world history. Then he's got a few of the charts saying the end of finance, the end of Europe, the end of world trade. Then he has a picture of a hurricane and the eye of the hurricane. He says, we are here. We don't know exactly what is to come, but we can all join the very few dots from where we are now to the collapse of the first major bank, with very limited room for government bailouts. Why is that? Do you remember when we spoke 4 years ago now, maybe almost close to 5? We said that there would come a time that these bailouts would work, that they would throw money at the system. And then I said, when they do this, and it doesn't change any of the factors, they have to immediately shut the faucets off and go the other way. Otherwise, they'll continue to print too much money, they'll digitize too much money, they'll flood the market with too much money, and the engine will stall because you flooded it, or you will have a rocket ship on your hands, and you will have hyperinflation. And you'll have out-of-control interest rates eventually. With very limited room for government bailouts, meaning we've got nothing left now. There's no bullets in the gun except meaningless printing. We can easily join the next dots from the first bank closure to the collapse of the whole European banking system, and then to bankruptcy of the governments themselves. There are almost no brakes in the system to stop this, and almost no one realizes the seriousness of this situation. The problem is not government debt per se. Listen carefully. The real problem is the 70 trillion in G10 debt. The top 10 governments around the world, the 70 trillion is the collateral for $700 trillion in derivatives. That number equates to 1,200% of global GDP and rests on very, very weak foundations. Again, this is a presentation put together by former hedge fund guy at Goldman Sachs, now is a writer, but also ran one of the big hedge funds over in the UK, and he is warning that you're in an endgame scenario now. From an EU crisis, one that George Soros said is coming in the next 3 months. From an EU crisis, we only have to join one dot for a UK crisis of equal magnitude. Imagine the UK defaulting. What do you think would happen to Japan and China? Would they not be next? And do you think that the U.S. would survive unscathed? This is the end of the fractional reserve banking system and of fiat money. It is the big reset. This is what we've been talking about for quite some time. The big reset. This is what George Soros has wanted. The big reset. Who is designing when the system has to be rebooted? Who are the players that are designing that? This is why when people say to you, what, George Soros, why would anybody want this to happen? Because if you know the reset is coming anyway, if you know it's unsustainable, then you want to be the one to design what the future looks like. Remember the Fabian socialist window. We'll remold it closer to our heart's desire. Heat the world up and then remold it. That's what the big reset is for George Soros. From a timing perspective, I think 2012 and 2013 will usher in the end. You have to understand that the global banking collapse and massive defaults would bring about the biggest economic shock the world has ever seen. There would be no trade finance, no shipping finance, no finance for farmers, no leasing, no bond market, no nothing. The markets are frankly at a terrifying point of realizing that there is nothing they can do, including quantitative easing, to prevent this collapse. The next phase, as Spain and Italy go, will to see nationalism of banks, the nationalization of banks, and the assumption of bank debts on government balance sheets. This is what we talked to you about on Friday. We have Timothy Geithner coming out and saying, the governments have to take this debt on. Then expect to be shut out of financial markets. Bonds will be stuck at 1% of the U.S., Germany, UK, and Japan for this phase. The whole bond market will be dead. That means nobody wants to invest in companies. Short selling on bonds will be banned. Short selling stocks will be banned. CDS, banned. Short futures, banned. Put options, banned. All that will be left will be the dollar and gold. As defaults in governments and banks come to fruition, we risk a closure of the stock market entirely and a closure of the banking system as occurred in Argentina in 2001, Russia in 1998, and Brazil in 1999. We have around 6 months of trading in Western markets to protect ourselves or make enough money to offset future losses. Spend your time looking at the risks of custody, safekeeping, counterparty, etc. Assume that no one and nothing is safe. After that, put your tin helmet on and hide until the new system emerges. I wish I could see another option with an equally high probability, but I can't find one. All we can do is hope that I'm wrong, but either way, a new system will emerge, and it will open up a whole new set of opportunities. But we are going back 40 years in time, and 1,500 to 3,000 years in trading. This again from Not a Schlub. This again coming on the heels of what George Soros said this weekend. George Soros said that he felt the EU had 3 months. They're saying the same thing.